My name is Nick, and I'm going to be the next school shooter of 2018. Location is Stone Douglas in Parkland, Florida.
The report highlighting security failures in the Parkland school massacre.
Curz begins punching himself over and over and over again. And once the questioning started, it did not take long for him to tell the detective that he's long had a voice in his head, his demon.
Why did you stop it then?
I don't like the demon, I don't like the demon, I don't like the demon, I don't like the demon.
Well, that's if the demon even exists.
Can I get an attorney or something?
There's something unsettling about interrogation rooms. They're small, quiet, controlled. No escape, no distractions. Just a table, a few chairs, and the truth waiting to surface. On February 14th, 2018, just hours after one of the deadliest school shootings in modern history, a young man was led into one of these rooms. His name was Nikloas Curz. He didn't look panicked. He didn't look broken. If anything, he looked empty. And what unfolded inside that room would later become one of the most analyzed police interrogations ever recorded. The day began like any other at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Students sat in classrooms, teachers prepared lessons. Hallways buzzed with the usual noise of teenage life. Then, gunshots. Loud, repetitive, unmistakable. Panic spread instantly. Students ran. Some hid in closets, others barricaded doors. Within minutes, the school transformed from a place of learning into a scene of terror.
We saw kids running towards us saying shots have been fired and to run, and we ran as fast as we could.
17 lives were taken, and in the middle of that chaos, the shooter did something unexpected. He walked away, blending into fleeing students, disappearing into the confusion, as if he had never been there at all. But he hadn't gone far. About an hour later, law enforcement located him. No chase, no resistance, just quiet compliance. When officers approached, Curz didn't fight. He didn't run. He simply surrendered.
What's going on? What's going on today, bro?
The demons, man.
Demons?
Yeah, no problem.
Voices and demons?
Where's the voices?
And soon after, he was transported to a police station where the real story was about to begin. Because catching a suspect is one thing, understanding them is something else entirely. The room was plain, almost sterile. A table, a few chairs, a camera recording everything. Across from Curz sat Detective John Curcio. This wasn't going to be a shouting match. No aggressive tactics, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, something far more calculated. Patience. Curz sat slouched in his chair, speaking softly, almost too softly to hear. At first, his answers were minimal, short, detached, emotionless. And then, he said something that immediately shifted the tone of the interrogation. Curz claimed he wasn't alone. He said he heard voices. Voices in his head that told him to kill. He described them as demons, whispers, commands he couldn't ignore. On the surface, it sounded like a classic case of insanity. But interrogations aren't just about what is said. They're about how it's said. And more importantly, when. Because something strange began to happen. Every time the detective stepped out of the room, the atmosphere changed. Curz shifted. He began talking to himself, but not in a consistent way. Sometimes he whispered, sometimes he laughed quietly. At one point, he made odd hand movements, almost like he was acting out a role. It didn't feel natural. It felt performed. Then, the moment the detective returned, silence. calm, controlled, still, as if a switch had been flipped. Detective Curcio didn't interrupt him. He didn't accuse him of lying. Instead, he let Curz talk. He asked simple questions, gave him space, watched closely. Because in interrogations, pressure doesn't always come from force. Sometimes, it comes from silence. And slowly, patterns began to emerge. Curz repeated the same claim. The voices made me do it. But when asked to explain those voices, his answers became vague, inconsistent. He couldn't describe them clearly, couldn't explain how they worked, couldn't maintain the same story twice. At the same time, something else stood out. He remembered details, clear, specific details about what he had done, where he walked, what he carried, how events unfolded. That kind of memory doesn't align with total loss of control. It suggests awareness, planning, intent. Feigning insanity is not uncommon, but it's incredibly difficult to sustain because real mental illness doesn't follow a script. It's messy, unpredictable, inconsistent in ways that can't be controlled.
When you're talking about demons, what are the demons?
Voices.
Well, tell me about it. What are the voices about?
It's another voice, the evil side.
Okay. And how long has that voice been going on?
Years.
Okay. When did it start, you think? When your mom passed?
It started getting worse when my mom passed.
Okay. Did you ever tell anybody about the voice? Never? And what does the voice say to you?
Burn, kill, destroy,
Okay, burn, kill, destroy what?
anything.
Now you talked about demons, and then you talk about the
That's the
voice.
demon. The voice is the demon.
The voice is the demon.
The interrogation didn't end with a dramatic confession, but it revealed something important. Nikloas Curz admitted key actions: buying the weapon, going to the school, and carrying out the attack. Despite claiming voices, his detailed memory suggested awareness, planning, and intent. Curz was charged with 17 counts of first-degree murder and 17 counts of attempted murder. The case was never about who did it. It was about whether he deserved the death penalty. In 2021, Curz pleaded guilty to all charges, avoiding a traditional trial. He apologized in court, but the focus shifted to deciding his punishment.
I am very sorry for what I did, and I have to live with it every day. And that if I were to get a second chance, I will do everything in my power to try to help others. And I am doing this for you, and I do not care if you do not believe me. And I love you, and I know you don't believe me, but I have to live with this every day.
It cut him no sympathy.
We want him dead. We want him forgotten. I don't ever want to hear this kid's name again.
If you wanted to do something for our families, you shouldn't have killed our loved ones.
Curz appeared to believe the families would decide whether he gets life imprisonment or the death penalty.
I hope you give me a chance to try to help others. If I believe it's your decision to decide where I go and whether I live or die.
Curz was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The decision left many families divided between closure and disappointment. The case sparked ongoing debates about gun laws, mental health, and justice. The interrogation itself remains widely studied as an example of behavior, deception, and psychological complexity.